like to propose 8.1 sponsorship request for Canadian Badlands. And in camera, there's a legal update and a labor update that we would like to present today. Are there any other additions or deletions to the agenda? Seeing as none, would someone like to move the agenda as amended?
I'll move to accept the agenda.
Councillor Penner has moved the agenda as amended. All those in favor? And that is carried. Regular council meeting minutes of February 13th have been pre-circulated. Are there any corrections?
I just have one comment. Did we let FCS know the outcome of us attending the Discovery Nights? Great, thanks.
I'll move that we adopt the minutes.
Councillor Christie has moved. Adopt the minutes as presented. All those in favor? And that is carried. Okay, we will skip down to 5.1, bank rec for November and January of 17. Thanks, Mike.
Good morning, Mr. Reeve and members of council. Item number 5.1 is the bank reconciliation, and for the record, it should be for the periods of November and December 2017, as the title and the subject is. There's an error as it states January 2017, which I would suggest January 17 is important to prepare the remaining period of the year. To request Council's acceptance of the November and December 2017 bank reconciliations. The bank reconciliation has been completed for the period indicated. Of note, a total of $30 million has been invested into 5 GICs starting November 14th, 2017 to August 11th, 2018. Interest rates range from 1.81% to 1.91%. And total interest at maturity will be $282,863.02, and the details as provided on the bank reconciliation page in your attachments. And the directed action would be to accept the November-December 2017 bank reconciliations as information.
I'd move that we receive as information the November and December bank reconciliations.
Motion's been made. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, 5.2, Mike, policy 16-12.
Thank you, Reeve Woodstock. Item 5.2 is financial policy 1612, county credit, debit, and fuel cards. A review of the current policy identified there is an unutilized corporate credit card as we speak. January was a month of heavy utilization in terms of booking future and attending current conferences and workshops for the Director of Municipal Services, for which many departments report to, and that's in the org chart. After reviewing usage of that particular card, it was apparent that the manager of Parks and Ag Services was the manager that used the director card the most, primarily due to conference commitments and administering responsibilities within the Ag Service Board. The proposed change is simply approving a card for the position of Manager of Parks and Agricultural Services and deleting the card for the vacant Economic Development Officer, which is sort of pending for the future. The overall corporate limit would stay intact, and the policy is attached as follows. And the recommended action is to approve the amendment as presented.
Does council have any questions for Mike?
I guess my only question, credit debit card is a credit card, it's not a debit card.
That's correct, Councillor Christie. It is a credit card.
I'll make the motion that we move that from economic development to the Ag Service Board.
Motion's been made to approve the county credit, debit, and fuel card policy 16-12. Or if there's no questions, we'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll go on to 5-3, the reserve reallocation. Mike?
Thank you, Reeve Woodstock. Item 5.3 is the proposed reserve reallocation. Background is such that Kneehill County Council at recent strategic planning session determined to make several changes to its long-term strategies. Among those strategic plans were to reallocate certain council reserves. As per Financial Policy 16.1 attached, Policy Guideline 1 states that council make any reserve transfer by the way of council motion. At the 2018 strategic planning session, council also made future water expansion as a strategic priority, leading into the discussion. 1, rural internet reserve as attached. The current balance is $1,301,528.04. Council determined that these reserves could be better prioritized to other capital projects. This was the direction from the 2018 strategic planning session. Number 2, the Revenue Stabilization Reserve has a current balance of $2,590,000. This reserve was established from the 2016 year-end process, whereby there was a motion to establish this reserve and to transfer the full balance, the $2.59 million, into the newly established reserve. When it was anticipated that very early preliminary assessment for 2018 was going to decline significantly, which it had done so in a number of assessment years prior. Only after the interim budget was passed this past December 2017 by this council was the county aware assessment was not going to decline to the anticipated level, and those funds could then be allocated to other capital projects related to the reserve to which it could be transferred. These are simply information for council. The engagement portion of it is for council notes, the website and social media. Obviously, the big link here is to the fiscal sustainability. And the policy 16.1, that's the reserves. 2018 strategic chart is brought forth to the previous council meeting, and current proposed reserve balances spreadsheet, which was the balance as of the third quarter. And the recommended action for council's consideration would be to transfer that $1,301,528 to rural internet reserve and $2,590,000 from revenue stabilization reserve, both to the water reserve.
Are there any questions for Mr. Morton?
I guess I have a number of questions, Mike, if you wouldn't mind kind of walking me through the reserves a little bit. I spent a fair bit of time with my pencil last night trying to figure out what we might do. We have a number of reserves, like an IT reserve, a strat plan reserve, and a fuel stabilization reserve. All of those are not ones that we're talking about. And then the two that we're talking about today, the revenue stabilization and the rural internet. And I'm just wondering if you could give me a little bit of detail on the three that I mentioned first, the IT, the strat plan, and the fuel stabilization, why they were put in place and what we use them for.
Councillor King, I will certainly do my best to answer those questions. Understanding that there's a little bit of history with those particular reserves really tied to maybe previous administration and council. Certainly I can speak on the, for sure on the IT reserve as certainly a little bit more intimately knowledgeable about the function of that reserve. And primarily it's treated as I would suggest, as we know, the capital equipment replacement reserve, the same kind of concept we use for the IT reserve, whereby the supervisor of information services prepares what I would call like an amortization plan for each of the pieces of equipment and computer equipment, and I believe the phone is in there and some of our big ticket IT items. Estimated cost, useful life going forward, and then we sort of roll it out on an annual basis as to what those requisitions would be to fund the reserve. And then when the IT pieces of equipment are purchased, we'd actually draw from the IT reserve, and those are usually found in the operating budget, because typically IT, at least and according to our policy, we're not capitalizing on our as part of a financial statement. So we've been treating it typically as an operating expense on the operating side. But that I would suggest that that's an active reserve, for just to give you some history. So it's a fantastic question. The second reserve, I would suggest, that fuel stabilization was put into place several years ago, and I believe the Reeve was probably at the table, and Mr. Reeve, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when that was put into place, that was for the notion when back in the 08, 09 era, when the volatility of fuel was absolutely from week to week, was literally going all over the place. And I believe at one point in that year, there was a situation where there may have been a shortfall on the fuel that was budgeted for, and the notion of that reserve was as it suggests, was to stabilize the part of the budget process, whether good or bad. So if there was at once upon a time, if there was unspent money in the budget, in that particular budget line item, that money would also be transferred into reserve. But at a certain point, enough's enough in terms of what's a fair amount in terms of what that amount might look like. To give you context, our budget on fuel has been running anywhere from $900,000 to $1.2 million. So the amount sitting in there is probably 25 to 50% of that total amount. So to me, that would probably be a fair amount if we're ever to see such a volatile occurrence to happen, to be able to fund any shortages, let's say, in the fuel allocation. Now, we haven't had a situation in recent time that we would need to, but that would be the purpose of that particular reserve. The third reserve in question, Councillor King, is the Strategic Planning Reserve. That's a reserve, I believe, under the old council that was used to set up if there was strategic initiatives that would come out of the strategic planning initiative, there was money in there. So if there was something that council, I believe, like a study or something, would have access to funds that would fall maybe outside of the normal budget process, but part of their strategic planning, they would have money to say access for that money for a study. So I believe that was the purpose and the intent of that reserve at the time, and obviously it hasn't been utilized in any time recently. So I would suggest that it's been relatively inactive from that perspective. But that's just a little bit of history on those particular reserves as to how they were established. I hope that was sufficient.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that. I guess in light of our strat planning chart, I'd like to make and the conversation that we're going to have around Churchill Waterline, and maybe perhaps some of the direction change that might happen there, I'd like to suggest that we consider a different allocation for the Revenue Stabilization Reserve and the Rural Internet. And I'm wondering if council would consider moving those two into the Hamlet Infrastructure Reserve in light of our conversation around hamlets and infrastructure in hamlets and potential reduction in the amount of money we might be spending on water project in the immediate future. It just might open up the opportunities to continue some of the conversation we've had around hamlet and hamlet infrastructure. So I guess my motion might be sort of contrary to the suggested motion, and I would make the motion that we transfer the Rural Internet Reserve and the Revenue Stabilization Reserve to the Hamlet Infrastructure Reserve. That would be my motion.
Does council have any comments, concerns?
I'm just wondering with whether we should put a portion of that with the Hamlet Reserve, but a portion with the Environmental Reserve.
Certainly, I'd be open to that as an amendment on my motion, that, and I would be willing to consider it a friendly amendment, and would, if we wanted to say, I guess we did have some discussion around the Wimborne situation, and perhaps we could put, I think in the,
I think there's 400,000 in the Environmental Reserve now.
Environmental Reserve is sitting at 322,975. So I think the dollars we're talking was somewhere in the 700,000-800,000 we would need. So I would amend my motion if council's agreeable to say we put the Rural Internet Reserve and the Revenue Stabilization Reserve into the Hamlet Infrastructure, with the exception of $500,000, which we would move to the Environmental Reserve, which would then allow us opportunity to have discussion around the Wimborne situation. So those two reserves to Hamlet, with the exception of 500,000 to go to environmental.
Is 500 enough for to go into the environmental one?
It would give us a total of a little over 800,000, and in conversation that I've had, I understand that that's probably going to be sufficient for managing that one situation at Wimborne. Perhaps, Al, could you maybe comment on that, give us a little more clarity?
Mr. Reeve, members of council, we currently on our books, I believe, Mike and Will, we are holding a $750,000 liability for the environmental situation in Wimborne. What the actual cost of that has not been actually engineered or determined yet. We have monitoring wells trying to sort out exactly where the leaching is taking place. We have some ideas, but the actual cost of that is undetermined at this time. So I would suggest that the 500,000 for now, increasing that reserve to 800,000, although that may or may not be enough, is certainly a step in the right direction until we actually get engineering done and know exactly what the bill is going to be on that mitigation. Then certainly there's other places that funding can come from, but that would certainly be a good start.
Well, thank you for that. My thoughts on this reserve situation is there is no panic to get any of this stuff moved around. If we want to have a committee of the whole discussion to discuss our reserves, maybe we should be doing that and being a little more cognizant of where the money needs to go, how much money needs to go into these reserves, and maybe if we table this until after that committee of the whole meeting, it may be the way you go about it. But if not, we could probably vote on this one and move it around later if we need to. Any thoughts on that through the council table?
Reeve, I was planning to do the same suggestion, so thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Members of Council, reserves are, and as we've discussed before, there are three types of reserves. There's allocated reserves such as the capital equipment replacement. Mike has talked about the IT replacement. Those are allocated reserves that we use that are budgeted for annually, and we do our capital purchase out of. Restricted reserves are those reserves that by bylaw are collected through a tax and can only be used for a specific thing, such as the water service area. The rest of the reserves are allocated, but they're not used, and they are purely at council's discretion. So regardless of any decision that you may or may not make today regarding reserve allocations, that is council's, administration does not tap into those reserves unless it's already itemized in an approved budget or through a council motion. So whether it's done today or done in 3 weeks, this is the allocation of reserves is entirely at council discretion. So I'll leave it to council to determine whether or not you want to do it today or at another date. There are other reserves in here that I would point out that administration has been talking about coming to council. You know, for example, we have a medical reserve of $250,000 that was at one time was kind of left over from the building. There's, again, the revenue stabilization, fuel stabilization, which we're currently not really using. There's a few others in there, cemeteries, et cetera, for a smaller amount. So there's probably a broader discussion that council could have on the reserves in total, but we'd certainly be happy to make any changes that you need today.
I would prefer to have a total discussion on reserves before we start reallocating. Not that this is going to be an issue with moving this stuff into environmental or hamlet reserve, but we do have a motion on the table. Is there any more discussion to that motion?
The only thing I would add is if it's the wish of council, I would be more than willing to withdraw this motion at this point. And if we would prefer to delay and wait and you're more comfortable with that, certainly I see room for conversation, and I'm not tied to this motion in any way, shape, or form. So if that's the wish of council, if you prefer to table and wait, I could withdraw the motion and we just table this till a chance to have more conversation.
That would be my preference, but then I'm only one of 7, so what's everybody else's thoughts here?
I agree with that.
I agree 100%, because I have some questions about some of the other reserves that we maybe clarify at a later date.
So as a point of order, is it appropriate that I could withdraw my motion? And so we just remove the motion from the minutes and we'll table this agenda item until a later date.
Okay, we have a motion to table until a later date. I would suspect that would be after a committee of the whole meeting where we can look at the whole reserve policy, or not the policy, but the whole reserve situation. And is there any comments to that?
Just as long as that date doesn't get delayed too far out, I guess. So,
would you like to put a timeline on that, Councillor King?
again, I think we'd have to ask administration in terms of what's coming up as far as some of our committee of the whole and whether we have room. I know we had talked potentially about a number of things coming up in, I think April's our next one, next committee of the whole. So do we have room at that time or not?
Mr. Members of Council, I see no reason why this couldn't be discussed at the April committee of the whole meeting.
In that case, I'm happy with that.
Okay, so your motion, would you want to include a date, or would that be after the committee of the whole in April?
I'll just say move to table the reserve allocation agenda item until the April committee of the whole meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor King. After checking with the parliamentarian, It seems that we are in order. The motion has been made. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you.
Just a note to say thanks, Mike. I do appreciate your work, and I did take a fair bit of time to go through them, and so I look forward to our April conversation.
Thank you, Councillor King. That reconfirms some good strategic planning going forward.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I guess we're off to policy 16-2, accounts receivable collection process.
So thank you, Mr. Reeve. Agenda item 5.4 is policy 16.2, accounts receivable collection process, as stated. Administration is reviewing policies that were last approved by council that are 3 years and older, and that's typically how policies end up on the agenda. The changes are noted in red on the attached policy document. Improvements were made to policy by adding stronger definitions and better clarification that better outlines the intent of the actual procedure administration follows, and just add a little bit more teeth to the and clarity as far as what the end of the collection process looks like. So note the better definition of account receivable by adding not being paid at the point of sale. So that's kind of adds to the definition of an account receivable. Policy guideline 3 better defines when a penalties apply and when there is a rare exemption from penalties. So typically everything is penalized, but there may be situations where of another agreement per se, where there's two parties, administration or two councils that agree that no penalties apply in certain situations. That would be an exemption from penalties, and that particular agreement would take precedent. Policy guidelines 5, 6, and 7 are progressive collection letters, which are a more practical process and components of the old policy. Sections 6 and 7 are now rolled into current section 8 to allow a better practical flow. So don't try to get too lost. Most of the content is intact. It's just the order of how it's now presented is more what changed. So it looks like a lot of changes. It's just for a flow for our accounting department. Policy guideline 8 is now the punitive stage at the administrative level, and procedures outlined the same as the old policy, number 7 of the old policy. So again, we're just leaving the largely the old policy intact. We're just changing a bit of the order. New policy guideline 9 is now separate and indicate the last stage of the collection process where CAO and council become involved. So at a stage where there's maybe a write-off or legal, if the file would be, say, big enough that we would proceed with legal matters, it would be council's direction either to do that or the CAO's direction to write that, either proceed with it or write it off. New guidelines 8 and 9 were all part of the old guideline 7, which you now can see are separate, and it makes them, again, much more practical. So the policy overall, I would suggest, improves in terms of its practical application. And policy guidelines 10 to 12 include a time frame and a title change from the accounting supervisor to the manager of accounting services. And with the policy changes, it's not going to affect the amount of interest revenue. We haven't changed that part of it in terms of the timing of when penalties are issued. So in a sense, penalties will apply when they apply, the same as the old policy. And the link to the strategic plan would be, again, fiscal sustainability and collective. I would suggest that having a strong collection policy, when you stay on top of things, I believe the stats are ridiculously high as opposed to ignoring and not doing your due diligence to collect on old accounts. So staying on top of it's usually the most successful method in terms of collecting accounts. And the policy is attached, as well as the noted collection letters that would go out to the delinquent accounts in terms of our ratepayers and our users. So.
Does council have any questions for Mr. Morton?
The one question I had on letters 1 and 2 on the what do you call it? I guess the example letters. There's an indication of what's owed on letter 3. There's no values with it. I would imagine that would be added to the letter.
Yeah, typically we would have the total, we like to have the total amount owing. So if there's any current charges, we like to show what the current portion is, but also, and also the statement would go out with that as well, so.
Glenn?
I would suggest you quit dealing with Mr. John Doe, but I would like to make the motion that we approve accounts receivable collection process policy.
Thanks, Councillor Kiever.
Well, that was fairly timely. We have a motion on the table. Is there any conversation around that motion? And if not, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously.
Thank you, Council.
Well, Mike, looks like you got the podium again. We'll go on to 5.5, user fee review.
Lucky number 5. Thank you, Reef Whitstock. The number 5 is the user fee review, and the background is to review the Kneehill County services and user fees. As per the February 13th, 2018 council meeting discussion regarding strategic initiatives, council directed administration to provide an overall review of the services offered and the level of cost recovery for those services. This report shows a high-level estimate of cost recovery put together with the operations managers, which are assembled behind me largely. Additional financial analysis may be required on some of these services to bring out greater detail and accuracy. So I would suggest that some of the intimate details are sort of behind the scenes in that regard. Of note, the yellow highlighted items in the attachment indicate where the type of service that would be provided would be considered significant, or I guess the word that we're floating with the managers team is in terms of magnitude. So what magnitude or impact is it of the big picture of the total revenue does that service have, or somewhat significant from a cost point of view. So the yellow highlighted items you will note are for that purpose. And those include in the Ag Services Department rental equipment and the county summer tour, in the Parks Department including Horseshoe Canyon, Keevers, Swalwell, Torrington, Brackeneer campgrounds. In the transportation was dust control, and environmental services are all water rates, also new connections, Hamlet garbage, and drum solid waste requisition are the big ones what we would consider with significant magnitude or materiality to the overall revenue source. And this is really for council's information and background. Again, there might be some questions that are very specific if you have them. I do have a panel as well of experts that would be willing to help me answer some of those questions if it's not readily available in my information package. So thank you.
I would hate to put staff on the spot, not with them not knowing exactly what the question is going to be, but we can have general discussion amongst ourselves, or I know this is coming up in a committee of the whole meeting. This was kind of set up to have us determine which ones we would like to look at. I don't think we want to go into a committee of the whole and look at all of them. So this is kind of for information and maybe to bring it back at a later date, but have everyone aware that there are significant user fees here that may or may not have to be looked at. So what are council's wishes? What's your concerns? And let's get something on the table here to start the discussion.
I want to thank Mike for putting this together, and I think April, there will be a big discussion in our committee of the whole. We're discussing it, I believe it was April. So I do have some things to bring up then to discuss, just to clarify why it's at the percentage it's at and things like that.
Thank you, Councillor Penner. I'd just like to give the credit to Will Wolf here, the Manager of Financial Services. He was largely instrumental in putting this information together, so.
So the goal today really is just to put it in front of us so we have time to think about it before April and maybe come back with some more specific direction.
Councillor King, that would be my recommendation. That was I believe the intent of the report was to provide you the tools in terms of information so that you'd get a better perspective as to what that really looks like in terms of where we want to delve into it on maybe a more thorough investigative report in the future. So that's exactly the intent, I believe.
I think if all of council could look at these user fees and email back to administration which ones they would like to look at. That way we'll have some more added information at the committee of the whole meeting, and we can look at it more in depth then. But this was more for awareness, and yeah, if you can email back to the administration on which ones you'd like to look at, that would give us a pretty good idea of what that committee of the whole meeting will look like.
I know from my perusal of them last night and yesterday afternoon that with the questions I have, we'd be here for a little bit of time. So we need a more freewheeling discussion than what we're possibly able to have here today. So I guess my motion would be we receive for information and follow up as directed or as requested that we get back to administration in terms of our priorities.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Councillor King. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And our next one will be fairly in-depth, so I think we'll call a recess and we'll get back to it. Okay, we'll bring the meeting back to order. Next on the agenda is 6.2.1 Churchill Water System. I see John is here, and would you like to start, Al?
Thank you, Mr. Reeve, members of council. The Churchill water system, and I'll let John get into detail in the request for decision, but council will notice that you have in front of you an addition, which is an amended request for decision. After taking some time on Friday and over the weekend to relook at our recommendation, you'll notice that the recommendation, the bulk of the RFT has remained the same, except the recommendation has changed, that our recommended action will be to council to postpone any further discussion regarding Churchill Water until the committee of the whole meeting in which all options can be discussed, and council to choose either existing committee of the whole dates or choose a new date to discuss Churchill Water. Originally, we were operating under the premise from previous engineering that the Churchill water system upgrade would be in that $8 to $9 million vicinity. And as you can see from the engineering report that was attached to your package, that has bumped into the $15 million range. And as a result, I think that needs to be some additional thought needs to be given to that. With that being said, I'll turn over the rest of the presentation, John, and he'll walk you through what the system is, could be, and was.
Okay, thank you, John. Anytime you're ready.
Thanks, Mr. Reeve, members of council. I guess I won't go through the RFD since you kind of went through the motion and stuff like that. So I will get into straight into the presentation that I prepared for the Churchill Rural Water System. So the Churchill Water System, so the scope of this presentation is going to basically provide scenarios to upgrade the water system, provide estimates for the system upgrades, and provide financial information on how to fund this project. The current system. So as most of you know, we've kind of gone through a little bit, but the current system, the water supply is connected directly through the distribution of the town of Drumheller. It goes through our booster station, which then boosts the water through to our users on that system. There is no water storage on this system, so we rely totally right on that distribution system. There's currently 37 users, more than the original design of the system. And the booster station that we have at the headworks there was upgraded in 2013. The level of service to the users is generally satisfied, but does not allow for expansion of the system and development at Horseshoe Canyon. Generally satisfied, there are times of issues when we have issues with supply of water, or when we have users using quite a amount of volume, where other users may be affected negatively. Also, this current system does not have a bulk water system to service the agricultural or commercial users in that vicinity. On the screen there, you'll see this is the map of the existing services. It also has the size of pipes. So currently, that's where the water is and where it's being delivered to. So the proposed distribution scenarios, some of the highlights of it would be it would accommodate future growth demands and with a new reservoir and pump station to be constructed. The reservoir site is being proposed. This was, and you'll kind of see it on the next maps, it's being proposed in a strategical location. This is at a high point. I wanted to say that that site isn't determined because no one's been approached for it. So this is just a hypothetical kind of a model kind of thing. So it's not where the reservoir is going to be because land hasn't been purchased or anything like that. So there would also be a dedicated fill line to the proposed reservoir from the Aqua 7 Regional Commission distribution line. This would require easements on privately owned land to bring that up through the valley. There would be a bulk fill station that would be available at the new pump house to accommodate those commercial and agricultural users. A total of 78 water connections were identified, including existing users and any new future users. So when this would be upgraded, that's how many connections would be on that system. The existing users on this system may need to construct or upgrade their own water service, as the distribution lines would be realigned and we would be abandoning lines that kind of zigzag through people's quarters and things like that. It would be all along roadways and that sort of thing. So there would be some existing users that may have to readjust their service line. There are 5 existing users on this that are non-county residents. They actually reside within the boundaries of Drumheller. They are atop of Monarch Hill. So that's another discussion point that should be looked at. And the majority of the water lines will be directionally drilled in road allowance. So again, back to that realignment, we would be directionally drilling these in road allowance instead of across people's property. So the first engineered scenario, scenario 1 we'll call it, is the residential and commercial with fire flow. So this would be a reservoir and it would need a capacity of 3,000 cubic meters. This would be a very large reservoir. The reason for that would be with the commercial, it was engineered, since there is no actual commercial plan in place, we had to go with the highest possibility of fire flow required, so the 3,000 cubic meter came into play there. So the pump house would include a dedicated fire pump, as I mentioned, 2 distribution pumps, and a jockey pump. So the jockey pump would just maintain pressure during low times and that sort of thing. There would be a looped piping system along Highway 9 for that commercial use, and I will show a map after this that will show whereabouts that would be. As well, this scenario would accommodate developments around Horseshoe Canyon. That would include the campground, any other type of tourist attraction that you needed. It would accommodate that development. This would provide potential full flow for residential users, 4 imperial gallons at 40 psi, which is what we use on our other rural systems. All water lines would be new construction, and existing water lines would be abandoned in place. The proposed network of piping ranges in diameter size of 50 millimeters to 300. The next slide will show the map of this scenario. The note is the light blue double kind of in the middle. That is your commercial loop. Well, actually, that one actually, the double blue should be going to the east of the reservoir, and Horseshoe Canyon is the larger one going to the left there. So there would be a commercial loop there. This is increasing the sizes all the way around just to provide a better volume. So the commercial water line, the next slide there, I have just some information on the commercial water line, maybe some points of discussion. There are some noted oil and gas pipelines throughout the properties that are located along this proposed commercial water line. Setbacks required for potential service road off highway to access commercial zones. So those points I'm trying to make are that to develop in those areas, there may be some restrictions because of the current gas lines, oil lines, and that sort of thing. As you can see up on the screen now, the green lines that are zigzagging, these lines, these properties are, the water line's not in there because it's not there, but these are the properties along that commercial line. And you can see all the oil and gas that are zigzagging through these properties. So I just wanted to make that aware. As well, we'd have to have a setback for a commercial, a service road off the highway as well. Another point of discussion would be there is no area structure plan for commercial development that has been completed as of yet in this area. As well, there's no engineered proposal to accommodate wastewater from that commercial development. And the rezoning of potential commercial sites has not begun. So I just wanted to highlight just maybe some points that should be discussed for that commercial line if this was the route that was to go. The second scenario, residential only. So this would be the same type of a system. The only difference would be that we would be taking out the commercial. So this would result in a smaller 450 cube reservoir to be constructed. This would also, the design of this would be designed so that we could have future commercial growth if we wanted to. So there would be in place some design that would allow for that. A bulk water system would also be available at this site as well. So we wouldn't eliminate that part of it. So that would still be able to accommodate that. And the proposed sizing you can see would range from 50 millimeters to 100. So that drastically kind of reduces it from the 300. This would just include no fire pump, but 2 distribution pumps that would be capable of 5.5 liters per second. So it would just kind of keep the pressure going out through the high peak demands, everything like that. It would satisfy the pumping requirements. This would provide the water users with a maximum potential of 4 imperial gallons at 40 PSI, which is what we run all our rural lines off right now, other than the few smaller ones. But this would, and I just mentioned that, so it would be the same service as our other rural users. And I just want to make sure that it's a potential maximum. I always, it doesn't mean they're guaranteed that all the time. At low flows and stuff, you're going to get that. At peak times, they may not, right? Again, this scenario would accommodate for development around Horseshoe Canyon. So with the size of line going out that way would be increased throughout this scenario. The next page is a map of this system only, and basically the big difference is there is no commercial line, and the line to Horseshoe Canyon is a little bit smaller in this one as well. But again, that line is sized to accommodate the growth of a campground. At this time when this was done, a campground was in talks and stuff like that, so it would support growth around there. So the next slide. So this is our options of where the fill line would come. So there was 3 options that we looked at to have a dedicated fill line to service this site. So option 1 is connection to Aqua 7. This would be the most desirable option for a feed line just due to the fact of the availability of water to the county. As well, the Kirkpatrick Reservoir is equipped to handle this new demand just with the pumps that they have in place and all that. So it's the option 1. The second option would be provide a dedicated feed line from the booster station. So instead of going through Aqua 7, we'd still continue through the town of Drumhellers, but this would be a dedicated line that would go straight to a new reservoir and fill up the reservoir directly from the town of Drumhellers. So bypassing the Headworks booster station, coming directly to ours, and then from that reservoir, then back pressuring throughout the system. So this one, just this one option coming directly from Drumheller, it doesn't address the concerns of maintaining adequate supply pressure when users on the Drumheller distribution are drawing water before. So we do have an issue with the rodeo grounds, the motocross track that are there. When they have events on and they're using water, then it robs us. We basically come down to a trickle of water, whatever we can get past them. So this one does not address that concern. As well, there is an agreement in place with Drumheller for supplying water to Churchill, and that has a limit of 10,000 imperial gallons per day. And that from the engineers, they say that would not satisfy the residential or the commercial. So there would be maybe a little issue with that. The third option we looked at was connection to the Kneehill County Phase 2 pipeline. So this would be the Granger water system. So this one was looked at just because there is a short distance from there basically to the Churchill system, but it was determined to be least desirable just because of the impact it would have on 80% of the users of Granger right now, and it would be a negative impact. It would take a lot of the pressure away from these people. So that was determined to be the least desirable just because it would impact those people that have been assured a certain amount of water and pressure. Next page, that's just the proposed tie-ins. Like I said, it's just a map, so you can see where the existing Kirkpatrick Reservoir is up on the north there. So that line would come out of the valley. It's a yellow line, and it would come up to there. So that's the most desirable to come out of there. The green line coming from the existing booster station, way on the right side of your map there, the east. So that's the green line. Again, that was, not a great one. And then on your left side of your map is the blue line. That's coming from the Phase 2 water line. So just a visual for you on all these things when we talk about them. So our next slide is the cost estimations. And as Mr. Hogan did allude to a little earlier, these These estimations have gone up over time, and I just kind of give you a little maybe background information on it. Our original estimates were based on us not abandoning the original Churchill lines, but using the majority of those lines within the newer system, new upgraded system. So that's where those original estimation came from. So recently I asked the engineers to go back and look at it and estimate based on their drawings of all new lines. And so that's where they came up with. So the first table there is for residential and commercial. So this is the big one. And you can see the price of the pump station reservoir truck fill is in the 6.1 million area. And the distribution upgrade is at the 12.3. And I'd like to just make note that this is probably higher than previous water projects because we are now looking at directionally drilling, which is kind of the favored way now, instead of open cutting and that sort of thing. So that is why it is a little bit more expensive, because the drilling is a little bit more. The dedicated reservoir fill line, I went with the first option, the most desirable, that was coming from Aqua 7. So that would show, that's the $735,000. And then these are just the proposed estimate land costs the engineer came up with for $250,000. That would be for the reservoir, for easements they may need and that sort of stuff. So that comes to a total construction estimation of $19.385 million for the residential and commercial line. The bottom table is for residential only. So this is basically getting rid of that large reservoir, going to a smaller reservoir, getting rid of that large commercial loop, and going down just to residential. So the biggest dramatic drop is with that reservoir just because of the size. So it was $2 million, so about 4.1 million less than that larger one. So that's where basically the savings is coming from. The next distribution upgrade, 11.3 million, got about a $1 million decrease just because we're not going to do that commercial line. Dedicated reservoir fill line is the same, coming from the same place, same size. That one could decrease because if we went with residential only, then that line size could actually be smaller. So we may save a little bit just on the pipe size there, but no, it wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be too significant to make a big impact on that final cost. Proposed land cost, again, engineer came up with this just because it's going to be a smaller area for the reservoir. And that total for residential only came to $14.185 million. So the next slide, these are kind of the timelines. So how far or how quickly this project could get done. The distribution portion of this project design phase is close to being completed. The plans will need to be finalized to incorporate the described information present for tendering. So there are things in the drawings that we currently have, depending on what council's direction is, how they want to go about things, that there are things that may have to change on there. We may have to look at also where the reservoir is. So depending on where that goes, may alter the drawings as well and may alter that thing. So there is still some work to do on the drawings. They're about 90% complete. So they're in there. They're basically the distribution where the pipes are. That's where they're going. But little things will have to change on there. So as well, there's multiple approvals that are still required before the final design can be finalized, such as Alberta Transportation and the Canadian Pacific Railway right-of-way approvals. So Alberta Transportation, just in initial discussions with them, they have no problems with us going in their road right-of-way, like along Highway 9 and stuff like that. They'll have no issues with it. They'll just need more information before they'll give the final approval. Canadian Pacific Railway, they have to be contacted yet. There's currently no confirmation that they'll allow us. There's usually with our previous ones, when we have to cross them, they usually have an agreement in place about a rental and things like that usually have to go through. But there's also a small area proposed for that fill line that will need some easement, so that will also have to be negotiated, as well as the negotiation for the reservoir site. So those still have to take place. There hasn't really been any discussions at all. So the geotechnical drilling as well for that distribution system will have to be finalized, so they're still gonna have to do some drilling out there. And the reason for that is it was administration, we felt that we didn't need to go into that just yet until it was finalized into the project. It could have just been a waste of of money going into engineering on something that may not have ever came to fruition, came to finalization. So we left that off, and once we got the go-ahead on it, then we would go back and we do that geotechnical drilling on the distribution side. So the engineers, they came up with a minimum of 12 weeks from project approval would be required to finalize and prepare the project for tendering. It would recommend that the tender be out then for another minimum of 4 weeks. So the schedule of 12 weeks could change if the scope of the project changes or the land acquisitions take longer. So if the scope of this project changed to however, it's not in one of these scenarios and it changed to a different type of a scenario, then they would need more time to rework their engineering and stuff like that. So there would be some time on that as well. So you're looking at about 16 weeks from project approval to, the shovels are in the ground. About that time would be the minimum amount of time. So our next slides here are the financial considerations, and I'll probably let Mr. Morton handle this one.
Thank you, Mr. McKiernan. That was a very educational and excellent presentation you did. Well, hi again, Council. I'll take it over from here. Basically, I brought this forward with the notion that Council may be making a decision today to proceed with the option to go ahead with the Churchill water line. So a lot of some of the information in the slides that I presented are made with a couple assumptions. But also in doing so, I also wanted to provide Council a little bit of information, education information, as well as so some information about what you'll see, some comparatives with the previous water service area project scattered throughout the presentation to just kind of give Council a bit of scope in terms of what that old project looked like from a money point of view, and how we dealt with it from that perspective. So just wanted to keep Council in mind. Would like Council to keep that in mind while you're reading through some of that. I'll definitely have made reference to some of the old project that we had done. So the first one, and probably the most obvious potential funding source, would be the current allocation of the project. So some carry forward money that was sort of looked at as from different options as far as the previous 2 budget years have gone on. So this has been going on, these discussions about improving the Churchill water for a couple of years now, in the sense that some of the money that was originally allocated way back in 16, and hence the B1606 project, there's approximately some engineering money in the amount of $967,000. And then a little bit of extra money that was added, topped up as another option that carried forward on B1747 for Churchill water storage, and approximately $99,000 there. So those funds remaining for these projects can be applied to the new project if Council approved. And what they'd be doing is just changing the scope of the project to a full-blown project that Mr. McKiernan is proposing. So some of those funds from the previous projects could be certainly moved to the new project. The second option, and this is where the qualifier gets in as to what I had mentioned in my preamble. The first bullet point in particular makes the assumption that money in agenda item 5.3 was moved from those particular reserves into the water reserve. So now, backpedaling on that slide, the $3.8 million that was allocated presumably into the water reserve now has to come out. So current unrestricted funds available approximately up to $7.4 million, not $11.2 million, coming from the following reserves: water, which would be about $3 million, and the water service area reserve, which would stay intact at $4.4 million. So now a total of reserves unallocated would be 7.4, not 11.2. current water service area reserve, as I just spoke to, of about $4.4 million is an accumulation from unrestricted general taxation that was used as interim financing from the previous water service area project. So there's still some unallocated money from the previous water service area project that could certainly be used. That's that money, the 4.4 sitting in the water service area reserve. The reserves are currently backed by cash, but we'll need to look at the overall cash financial position when heavy project expenditures occur, and must consider the 2019 overall budget. So right now, and you'll remember that at the previous committee of the whole, our auditors were saying our reserves were backed by cash, and that's what that statement is saying, that the cash is good for the purposes of going forward if council was to propose with that motion, with that option. And the last bullet on that one is actually not 6.8, but $3 million in roughly, and these are just approximations again, in the water reserve accumulated from net operating and surplus funds from previous. So that goes without saying. The third option is the local improvement taxes. So there's quite a bit to it, in other words. So I'll just go through it as my slides indicate. So this would be used if the landowner is expected to pay a portion of the cost. So if that was council's desire to have the residents pay a portion of it, then that would in a sense be considered a local improvement tax. The rules to impose this tax are outlined in section 391, part 10, division 7 of the Municipal Government Act, including the requirement of a local improvement plan. So that would be required, should count. And I think that we internally and in-house and with our lawyer would be able to develop that fairly easily. A local improvement, having said that, a local improvement tax is subject to a petition right in section 396 of the MGA if residents in that area are opposed. So just know that if that's the option that you would proceed with, then certainly that would be something that could be on the table for the residents in that area. Now, the question for council to consider is the amount to charge the Churchill residents to be the same as those charged in the water service area project. So with the previous water service area project, the residents were paying $6,000 up front, or they could amortize it annually, $563 annually paid over 15 years, which equates to about $8,444. So that difference is about $2,400 of interest that would be charged to the residents if they were to amortize it over their taxes. And lots do, and I don't know what the percentage is for the residents of the old water service area of how many paid up versus how many amortize it over their taxes. Certainly the majority amortize them over their taxes. So of the previous water service area project expenditures, which the total all in was roughly $49 million, the source of local improvements contributed approximately $6.8 million. That's about 14%. So residents actually paid about 14% of the total cost of the water service area. So with perspective on that, on estimated 14.2 as in Mr. McKinnon's presentation, that would, at the 14%, that would approximately $2 million. We would be asking $2 million in revenue from as a way of local improvement taxes, divided by the 78 residences. So they're looking at about $25,000 per residence to keep that same proportion as the old water service area, with the assumption that the 37 existing are treated the same as new. And I just ran a couple scenarios at the bottom. So the number that was sort of floated was the $10,000 per resident. That would generate about $780,000 if paid up front, which is well below, which would be well below that $2 million per the rough percentage as per the previous water project. Another option, again, as I already mentioned this, another option would be to allow residences to pay the annually approximately $840. It would cost $840 over 15 years, similar to the amortization schedule of the water service area project. And the interest rate we would be used is the ACFA date rate as of the date approved. And right now, the ACFA rate's around 3%. So it would be a little bit more for each of them. And that's at the assumption that it would be charged to the $10,000 per resident. That number would be changed, obviously, if council was to change the amount of the requisition to the ratepayers in that area. The fourth option is the MSI capital grant. Right now, there's no allocation. So our 2019 allocation, we haven't allocated towards a project. Typically, council, we've done put that towards gravel in the past, but certainly I believe that option could be at play. Now, it's not yet confirmed by the province because they will only do it on a year-by-year basis, although according to the provincial plan notes, the MSI expected to carry forward into 2019, and then they're going to look at the overall sustainability of that program going forward. But my understanding when I read the bullet on Municipal Affairs website was that it looks like they will carry forward one more year into 2019, meaning there could be an estimated $2.6 million of MSI money for 2019 to be put towards that project. The fifth one is the special tax, and there are very specific rules, and rules apply as per Section 382, Part 10, Division 5 of the Municipal Government Act. Just so you know, the total assessment in that designated area that is not currently on the water service area. So the residences that are hooked up in the Churchill system right now are paying the water service area tax. So what this bullet really says is that there's a portion of the designated water service area tax, and potentially for those new hookups that would be part of the new 78, there's an additional approximately $12 million, well, almost $13 million in assessment that would come from designating those properties into the water service area and be subject to that tax. So that if that same tax rate was used as the water service area, which is currently the 0.022 for residential and farm, the total taxation would be about $2,800 a year times 20 years. So the total additional project revenue from those additional residences and sections would be $56,000 in total projected revenue towards the overall project. But that doesn't mean that the water service area tax, as we know it today, or what we're doing, they would certainly apply in this case. So we would be able to use the current water service area tax that we're currently using to pay for part of this project as well. So the scenario to continue to apply the special tax rate of 0.007 to all non-residential properties and 0.022 to residential and farm properties within the designated area, water service area, which has been done in previous years. And our annual, and just to recap what I was just saying, the annual bylaw included, whereas a special tax bylaw authorizes the council to impose the tax in respect of a property in any area of the municipality that will benefit from the specific service or purpose stated in the bylaw. So that's what our current bylaw says, that it's for the benefit of in any area, and Churchill Water Service area would certainly qualify for that. The last revenue source for the project would be the operating funds from general taxation. This option would mean that every taxable property in the county would pay for this particular water project. This was used in the old water service area as an interim method to raise revenue, and we're still, as I mentioned before, in the water service area, there is still some of that, though that revenue still sitting in there before grant revenue funds were sourced. So when I'm of the view, when I did the research, that the old council, we imposed a sort of a general interim tax when it was unknown that some of the funding sources were going to materialize as they did. There's two grants in particular when we proceeded with the old water service area tax, the Building Canada Fund and the Alberta Municipal Wastewater Program, the trunk line that went into Swalwell and Torrington. Those were grant funded that I believe were never intended to be part of the financing options at the time. Now, having said that, the backup plan was to go ahead with general taxation revenue. I believe there's a couple years of $2 million put away for the purposes of the project. So that certainly is an option. Then when those grant funds were materialized, those general tax dollars were no longer needed and now are sitting and could be used in other allocation of projects. So that's kind of for lack of better words, the planning that was done as far as we're going to proceed with the option to go ahead with the water service area tax, and this is kind of our plan B at the time, and as it turned out, the grant funds were available. So anyway, that's long story short. Zero taxation dollars were intended to be paid for the old water service area project with the hopes that grants were going to be available, and as it turned out, they were. The last two are just cash flow tools. So the short-term borrowing, this is not a revenue source. So the revenue sources are 1 through 6, and that's exactly how you pay. That's how you're going to raise money to pay for those projects. 7 and 8 are just cash flow tools. Cash is not anticipated to be an issue, but we won't know that for sure until the 2019 budget deliberation. So I don't anticipate, should council proceed with the project, that debt will be required, or at least in a short-term capacity, but we won't know that depending on what the capital budget will look like for 2019. And the tool available would be the service line of credit, which is at our fingertips, and council passed that bylaw authorizing to use that if we need to, and would be paid back using any of the revenue sources in options 1 through 6. Long-term debt is number 8, and again, this is not a revenue source, but it is a cash flow tool. As I stated, cash is not anticipated to be an issue, but we won't know that for sure until the 2019 budget deliberations. The Alberta Capital Finance Authority, that's ACFA that I mentioned, published the rate as of February 1st, 2018 on a 10-year term. So that's the cost of borrowing would be close to 3% at 2.937 as I spoke to earlier. So just to run this another scenario, at 10 years, 2.937% on 10 million, let's say $10 million principal equals $1,634,798 total interest payable on that $10 million. And on $5 million, the principal is half that, of course, so that would be $817,000 total interest payable. So on the old water service area project, the borrowing was $17.3 million, was borrowed through debentures, 2 debentures in particular, 11 million for 10 years and 6.3 million for 5 years. Of course, those are no longer on the books. We did opt to prepay those about 2 years ago with some of the budget funds that were available when we finalized the year end. And we went ahead, and there was no penalty to do so. We did check with them. So when we did the balloon payment to pay out those debentures, that we went ahead and paid them without any penalty. So cash flow never ended up being an issue, as grants were available that were not anticipated in the original project planning. But you can really argue that it could have certainly been an issue had those not have been available. And there's so much paperwork and so much information as far as the MGA is very specific as to the requirements, the advertising requirements, and the public engagement process as far as if council was to borrow. So the length of time to actually borrow takes quite a while, and certainly couldn't hang up the project on the notion that we were, had to do the proper advertising and so forth. So there were some timing issues as far as unanticipated events that happened as far as, and I spoke to as far as how the grants came in and so forth. And of course, that would be paid back using revenue sources in options 1 to 6. So those are sort of the financial considerations and tools at council's fingertips. There's certainly options. I don't think money would be an issue as far as going ahead with deciding to do that for that project. There's lots of tools at fingertips. There's cash in the bank through reserves, all kinds of options as stated. But really, it rests with council's bigger picture and where they want to go with that. I think that's probably where I'll end the discussion here today. Again, I would just suggest in this number in mind, so the approximate value of the previous water service area project was $49 million. 864 risers were put in, which on a unit cost was about $57,000 per unit. And we're looking at a much significant higher cost should council proceed with that. Almost 3 times the unit cost would be to do that for this particular project. So I just like to leave that with council, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Morton and Mr. McKiernan. I don't believe I butchered your last name this time, John. I'm learning. Although this was identified, the Churchill Water Project was identified in our last strat planning session, the costs are now significantly higher than what we had anticipated. I think future discussion is going to be required, and maybe there's a possibility of other options to make this line work better than what it is and possibly add more people to it. I think I'll open this up for council discussion. Does anyone have a comment or anything to add to this? Or question?
Well, thanks again, once again, for all the information, overwhelming amount. I guess I'm sitting here right now thinking that I need more time. There's a whole ton of changes that have happened since we sat in our strat planning. The big one being the almost prohibitive cost for the amount of users that we potentially would be servicing. And you know, just the questions in my mind around commercial industrial development and how much those gas, oil pipelines are going to limit available properties. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that we just don't know. And so certainly I'd come down on the side of saying we need to have a lot more discussion around this, and potentially could be a committee of the whole meeting almost on its own.
Thank you, Councillor King. When you look at the numbers here, we're looking at close to $200,000 one way or the other per riser. And considering that the other water service areas were pretty much around $60,000 to $62,000, $63,000 per riser, this is, 3 times the amount of money. And it's a lot of money. Councillor McGee, you had a comment? I'm sorry if I broke in.
I also would like to have time to further understand the agreement for the people who already have water in the Churchill area and how that affects them and the money they have invested already. I'd like to have a more clear understanding of that at the committee of whole.
I agree. We're going to have to do a little more consideration on this project. Are there any other comments or questions for the presenters?
I guess one of my thoughts is it's the oldest part of our water system, and whether a total upgrade is necessary or a partial upgrade where we put cisterns in each house now to make it back to the system that it was designed to be, and upgrade it to that to handle the ones that aren't hooked onto it now. I appreciate that at times it's out of water.
It's certainly not an ideal system the way it's running now, but it has worked for a number of the residents. But yeah, we've got to look at different scenarios possibly.
I guess the comment I would make is I think that in terms of our strategic planning, the commitment from my point of view still is that we do something with Churchill Water. How we go about that, how we provide more equitable service to the current users, plus open up options for potential future users. That's a big conversation that certainly you've given us a lot of groundwork towards that, John and Mike, thank you. But certainly like I said earlier, it's a much bigger conversation, I think, than we're prepared to have this morning, that's for sure.
Is anyone prepared to make a motion?
Question for administration, I guess. First, I know we pretty much filled up our April committee of the whole meeting with other things. And I'm just sitting here wondering, all councillors are present, we all have our calendars. Is there potential to add another committee of the whole meeting? And I guess further to that, the question would be how much time would be needed to prepare some of the alternatives and some of the options that we could consider at that meeting?
Mr. Reeve, members of the council, having had some discussions with the Director of Municipal Services, I think anything post March 27th, April 1st, basically 30 days from now, we'd be prepared to have a committee of the whole. And I would also suggest this is probably a big enough topic that it should be a sole item at a committee of the whole. This could be a fairly lengthy discussion, given all the options that may exist in Churchill. So.
One of the things, if we have a water committee of the whole meeting, it should probably involve more than just Churchill. Looking at the whole water system at the same time in the discussion.
You're asking for a 2-day committee of the whole.
It's a big dollar value.
So, Mr. Reeve, would it be appropriate that we try to find a date at this time? I guess I'm asking the question of council as a whole, but you in specific. We've been indicated it would probably have to be after the 1st of April. And we already do have sort of commitments in April at a committee of the whole. Would council be open to an additional committee of the whole date?
I guess my question would be, would an afternoon session be sufficient for council, or do we want to dedicate a whole day to this? We are having a council meeting on the 10th, and if we could go into committee of the whole after that, maybe that might be a possible date, or whatever anybody thinks. Let's have a discussion here.
Starting in the morning, I find better, just in case we have to carry on to the afternoon. I hate to have to stop it without, and it may happen like that. One day may not be enough, but I want to leave the option open that we could go into the afternoon if we could find another day.
The 4th and 5th are open on my calendar, I do believe. I don't see anything here. I don't know, maybe there's something from admin.
Mr. Reeve, members of the council, I'll leave it to the executive assistant, but I don't think there's much in April that we couldn't work around. It'd be council's discretion.
Well, looking at my calendar right now, certainly the 4th and 5th would be available. So depending on what the other councillors have on their calendars, I can make that work at this point.
My calendar's open.
Yeah, I can deal with either day.
As can I.
I'm good with that. So consensus would be for the 4th or 5th. Should we pick the 5th? If that works, it works. Okay.
I make a motion that we further the discussion on the Churchill water system until community of the whole, and we schedule it for Thursday, April 5th.
Thank you, Councillor McGee. We have a motion on the table. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Sure want to keep us thinking, don't you? Okay, next on our agenda is Protective Services, 6.5.1, Peace Officer Rural Crime. Lori, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Reeve and Council. I'm going to be Deb's voice today. She's still struggling here a bit, so I will do the best I can here for these two RFDs that she has prepared. So the first one, Peace Officer Rural Crime Deterrent Initiative Proposal. At the Kneehill County Council Strategic Planning Session in February 2018, Council set as a significant priority a strategy to assist in deterring rural crime by the addition of one or more community peace officers to patrol rural areas on a regular and frequent basis. We currently have 2 level 1 community peace officers working the 37.5 hours per week. Winter and summer shifts, we do vary accordingly, just to give a little variation on when they're out in the public. So the first chart that you can see there is kind of depicts what our current allocations are. We do have a significant number of duties that each of them look after that include municipal contract patrols, hamlet patrols, road patrols, bylaw contact reports with the public while they're doing this, administrative functions, the desk duties, assisting other departments within Kneehill County, such as planning, operations, fire, and water, park patrols, community-related events such as parades and other events, in schools in our area, and then the administration and the preparation that it takes to be ready for those students in the schools. So what would be proposed with the addition of 2 level 2 peace officers? That just gives you a little, the same functions that we talked about previous, but you can see where we've adjusted some of the allocations of time to meet the desired strategies of council. So I guess and another important note to make is community peace officers cannot engage in enforcing criminal code violations. A level 1 community peace officer can enforce moving traffic violations, but a level 2 cannot. So there are several options that we could do. We could hire 1 level 2 peace officer. We could hire 2 level 2 peace officers, 1 level 1, 1 level 1, and 1 level 2, or hire 2 level 1 peace officers. So if we did hire 2 community peace officers, that just the chart there that we show kind of shows where they would fit into the organization. We would put one of our existing peace officers with a little bit of a supervisory role of these new officers. With 2 community peace officer scenario, we would assign the roles and duties differently to ensure there is a little bit of reporting structure. Should be noted that by approving 2 community peace officers, there would be added ability to create the community resource officer role, expanding our visibility within our schools and the community, and also then with our community groups. Scenario with 4 officers, community resource officer level 1, school programs, community engagement, public engagement, and patrols. Community peace officer supervisor level 1, bylaw enforcement, patrols, organized patrol services to ensure goals are being met, safety, backup for the school resource officer. Community peace officer level 1 or 2, patrols, they would focus mostly on patrols and bylaw enforcement. The Protective Services Department organizational chart, should 1 peace officer be approved, would look like this here, with just added alongside all of the others. So a little bit of information now on the costs and source of funding. So a level 2 peace officer annually comes in at about $256,000. The 2018 impact would be $198,000, just over that. We've listed here the items. Going forward, a lot of these items are on a 3 to 4 or 5 year rotation basis, where they're replaced. So we're not looking at all of these costs that are listed here on an annual basis. For example, the vehicle, and they're typically on a 3 to 4 year rotation. And the same would be for a lot of the other equipment that is on the vehicle, camera equipment, PBE, radio. So those would be costs that we would just recognize as part of our replacement plan. So level 1 peace officer total is a little bit more. Your equipment is a little bit more. That's the differences. And of course the wages is where we see. So funding options, we could collapse the economic development budget that we are currently not utilizing, the operating budget. $207,491 was budgeted in 2018, and redistribute the funds to the enforcement GLs. Amend the 2018 operating budget to reflect the increase, funded through new taxation dollars, or fund through the current contingency budget. Engagement, consultative within Protective Services Department, public education, informative, municipalities within the area, as well as shared information with Kneehill County staff, public education, and in our schools. Linked to our strategic plan, priority 3 from our February 2018 strategic plan. Also hits very high on the safe and viable communities of our previous strategic plan. So recommended action is Kneehill County Council adds 2 level 2 peace officers in the 2018 budget and amend the 2018 operating budget fund through taxation dollars.
Thank you, Ms. Watt. Well, I guess we have some options here. If we do hire peace officers regardless of what level, there'll be visibility, but limited enforcement happening in the county. I would rather see red and blues on our water guys' trucks and maybe our road supervisors. There'd probably be just as much enforcement happening there, but then the visibility would be higher, but we can't do that. What's council's wishes? Do you have any questions?
I guess one of my questions, could a peace officer be involved with a community crime watch program too, or not? Or would that enhance one another? And what is there a community crime watch in our communities now?
The RCMP have indicated that they are doing rolling out a new rural crime strategy. And so the peace officers would complement that and work with the RCMP in whatever they're doing. And I know Crime Stoppers has also indicated that they would like a little bit more, I guess, involvement from our peace officers as well.
Regardless of what impact our police or our peace officers would have, rural crime is actually the responsibility of the RCMP. They have the enforcement and they have the ability to deal with this. Unfortunately, they don't have the staffing. And I guess if we want to put visibility out there, we can hire some peace officers, but that's a council decision. So any comments?
You're leaning towards 2 peace officers. Would we get no advantage with just hiring 1?
I think that would be half as much.
I would completely be okay with getting a level 2 officer, just 1. I think it would still increase it, not to the level that council, to the proposed levels, but it would still increase it, of course, the amount of hours that we can patrol.
But it wouldn't be a waste of money just having 1 instead of 2.
At strat plan, we talked at length about visibility is a big thing. Does deter crime. My opinion, 1 is a great benefit right now, and maybe in the future to go to a 2nd peace officer, but just being visible in the community. And if the RCMP does have a new coming out, that we work with them too.
Big problem with RCMP has always been staffing and their ability to get off of pavement and to where some of our concerns were. And in my mind, when we had this discussion at strat planning, you know, we really were focused on the increased visibility side of things. And if we go with one officer, we're potentially adding, you know, 28 hours of patrol time based on your projections. And I guess the question is, in 28 hours, how far can you go and how much visibility do you have? So I guess, you know, in terms of trying to stay true to what our strat planning focus was, certainly I know it's money, but and maybe potentially we see it as limited benefit, but visibility, visibility, visibility. And so I guess I would be in favor of moving forward with 2, but certainly it's a council decision, and I'm willing to go along with council in terms of whatever direction they wish to take.
Mr. Hogan.
And thank you, Mr. Reid, members of council. Councillor King asked a question, and just some very simple math, 28 hours a week at an average of 70 kilometers an hour would be 1,960 kilometers of visibility a week. If it was 50 kilometers, obviously it would be less than that, but if you just multiply how many kilometers per hour personal drive by 28 hours a week, so a single peace officer or multiple peace officers, you know, one peace officer will do 4,000 kilometers in a month. 2 peace officers would do 8,000 kilometers. We have 2,500 kilometers of roads. So essentially every road would get covered with 2 peace officers 4 times a month.
I do feel that the RCMP is trying to make efforts to change some things, and I'm concerned we'll invest the money when they already have a good plan that is going to address it to a degree. That's just one of my questions. How do we see that, the RCMP announcement affecting us? Because they made an announcement to address real crime, correct? Do you know any details around that?
I don't. I've only had one meeting with Staff Sergeant Gabe in regards to the rural crime strategy. Again, our peace officers cannot do crime, whether or not they're level 2 or level 1. They are not to act in criminal code at all. So it's our basic is to go for visibility more than anything in a rural crime strategy. That's going to be our role.
Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Reid, members of council. To Councillor McGee's question, the RCMP are focusing on CRU units, crime reduction units, which are very specific to investigating after the fact and finding whoever did it. That's one of the problems right now. However, their program is not designed specifically for deterrent. It's to remove the people that are currently committing the crime. That obviously has some benefit, but they're even called crime reduction units, and they are targeted specifically to investigate real crime. That is their mandate. They won't be out doing traffic. They won't be out doing other things. They are very specific to investigating rural crime calls. I think the program that the council discussed at strategic planning was more in terms of the deterrent and making it more difficult for people to be out in the country committing those crimes. So they're kind of two different, although they complement each other, they are two separate sides of the coin, of essentially the same coin.
I think the point of being visible goes along with everybody being vigilant, and with Community Crime Watch enhanced by a community peace officer that gets visibility and some basic training to the communities on patrol, I think has got some real merit. And I don't know whether one needs to do that or two.
How would the differences affect our manager protective services workload as well?
Mr. Reed, members of council, if you look at the org chart that was set out, what we would be doing is one of the current CPO level ones would essentially shepherd the two level twos if it was level twos that were hired. And if there are two of them, and you can see that they would report directly to our current level one, Matthew in particular, and Natalie would continue to focus on the community resource to which she's getting accolades locally for doing. So it won't add a ton of work to the manager of protective services because she would make the one peace officer basically the lead for the patrol side of things, and the two new peace officers would report directly to Matthew.
One of the big components in the deterrent side of the conversation, as I recall, was the fact that when people are out and about, not necessarily committing the crime, but maybe pre-planning, the visibility of the officers might be a deterrent to say, well, there are more officers out there, whether they have the understanding of what those officers are capable of doing or not. But, you know, the visibility is, a lot of times you hear people saying, well, we've seen this vehicle and this vehicle and this vehicle. And when Sergeant Gabe from the Three Hills Detachment was here, he said it's about reporting. What you see, you need to report. And certainly we say, you know, these guys can't stop crime, but they can report what they're seeing. And so to me, the idea of having them around is not so much that they're out there stopping crime, but they're seeing things, they're reporting those things to the appropriate authorities, and they're visible. So when I'm out there thinking about knocking off my neighbor's Quonset shop and you know, these patrols are going by, I rethink about the amount of policing that I'm seeing. And so to me, there's, you know, it depends on really what we want to accomplish, and the realization that we're not going to be, you know, generating a lot of revenue or whatever by doing this. It's about what you see, what you report, and what the criminal sees and potentially thinks about what's available here. So
I would agree with Councillor King's comments, but ultimately the onus does fall upon the landowner to protect his property. Now, whether that's locking your doors, putting up a sign that says you have a dog or actually do have a dog, whether he licks you to death or whether he bites you to death, I don't know if there's that much difference there, but put up a game camera. You know, let's get something going here that does deter criminals from entering somebody's property and potentially getting into a situation like just happened in Okotoks.
I would like a motion to add one level two peace officer, and to amend the operating budget to fund through tax dollars for this one person, I think, and then to review the effectiveness and revisit a second one at a later date.
We have a motion on the table. Are there any comments, questions to that motion?
The only thing I might want to add is that at a later date be in a fiscal year or something like that, put a timeline on it.
I agree. When we review the budget, same kind of timeline. Alvin, would you suggest is a good timeline?
Mr. Members of the Council, certainly the easiest time for administration would be during the budget deliberations going into the next budget year. My only concern in a position that can't actually apprehend, I would require somebody smarter than myself to tell me how we would judge its effectiveness. I don't know, in a position that is essentially going to be a deterrent, we have no way to prove a negative. So I won't know, I won't be able to report back to council, and Deb and Lori won't be able to report back to council saying we stopped 7,400 crimes because we don't know. Somebody that was planning on may have passed a peace officer and decided it's best to move on to a different county, but judging the effectiveness will only be based on, we'll be able to report back on how many kilometers or how many hours the person patrolled, And that won't be much different than what we showed you today. So, but in terms of the timing, it would be, the easiest time would be to do it as part of the 2019 budget when council passes that at the end of the year.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing as none, we have a motion on the table. Councillor McGee moved to direct administration to add an additional level 2 community peace officer for Kneehill County Rural Crime Deterrent Initiative and to amend the 2018 operating and capital budgets. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried.
The only additional comment I would make is there is no place there that reflects the comment about the review.
I will make a second motion requesting that we review the consideration of a second community peace officer at the time of budget deliberations.
Any questions or comments on that motion? Seeing none, I'll just wait until get that up on screen, because this time I'm not going to read it all.
I think we don't need to discuss, put in the what level of community peace officer, just community peace officer.
Okay,
that
I
correct,
see
Dave?
the motion is on the screen. Is that the way you would like to see it written there, Councillor McGee?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. It's there in front of you. All those in favor? And that is carried.
Could I suggest we take a small break? I could use a stretch and refreshing on my tea, so if you don't mind.
We will have a break. Not a recess, but a break this time.
I'd accept recess.
Okay, we'll bring council back into session. Next agenda item is 6.5.2, Kneehill County Rural Fire Strategy. And Ms. Watt, I do believe you're going to be the voice of our protective services person.
I am. Poor
Okay,
Dan.
thank you, and go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Reeve. At the Kneehill County Council Strategic Planning Session on February 2018, Council set the priority to create a rural fire strategy through the hiring of a fire chief to accomplish this task, as well as some other duties. The fire chief position description has been attached for your information, a draft of it, including some key duties: developing a long-term strategy for council rural fire services, managing Kneehill County's fire department, working with our municipally contracted fire departments, managing the regional fire training structure, and emergency management roles. And just below this, here's a proposed organizational chart. Cost, source of funding: fire chief wage grid proposal, $136,367. Salary, including that includes all the benefits. Fire services vehicle, in our capital budget, $32,500. We do have an existing vehicle in our fleet that would be repurposed for this. So the initial cash outlay would not be that significant, and then it would just go into the plan. Full fire services equipment, uniform, firefighting gear, cell phone, computer, that type of thing, around $9,000. Fuel estimated about $6,000 a year. Vehicle repairs and maintenance, $4,500, for a total of around $188,000. Funding options: we could again collapse the economic development budget, currently not staffed. We could amend the 2018 operating budget to fund the position out of tax dollars or fund the position out of contingency. Engagement: consultative within Protective Services Department, Torrington Fire Department, informative FMC committee, and all other fire departments, municipalities in our area, as well as shared information with Kneehill County staff. Link to our strategic plan, priority number 2 on our February 2018 strategic plan, as well as the Safe and Viable Communities strategic plan from 2015 to 2018. Recommended action is Kneehill County adds a fire chief to the organizational chart and funds the position through collapsing the economic development budget and transferring the funds to the appropriate budget line items.
Thank you, Ms. Watt. This is not a new position. This position was established in 2004 after the Pullman report was commissioned. It's been active now for 13 years, although the last 3 years or so there's not been anybody in that position. All we're looking to do is to put somebody else into that position to provide us the expertise that we need at this table to make our decisions. Are there any questions from the council or comments?
I guess one of my questions, if we proceed with this position, is there like not a trial period, but basically a probationary period? And can we review it annually?
Mr. Reeve, members of council, all positions in the county, permanent full-time positions, have the mandatory and standard 3-month probationary period. As for reviewing annually, council can review reviews the organizational chart on an annual basis. I would, however, caution that when you hire a staff member who thinks their job might only be year to year, you may have trouble finding somebody who wants to take the risk of moving to Three Hills or Kneehill County, knowing that in a year, council will review it every year. The review on performance is a separate issue, but the council review of the position would make it difficult to recruit somebody if they knew that every year the position was being reevaluated. However, that would be council's through the organizational chart review, which comes in March-ish of every year. Council certainly has that option.
I think it's critical to remember the conversation that we had at strat planning around this position. The council direction to administration was that we needed to define what as a county we see as a strategy for our fire. This position will be the person who does the liaison conversation with our fire departments, who will come back and provide us as a council the information that we need to develop and implement a rural fire strategy. And I think that was the key to our conversation. When you look at the description of the position, it talks about liaison, consultation, discussion with partners and other stakeholders. And so in terms of the conversation we had around this position, I think that what we have in front of us is just rehiring of an existing position with maybe some conversation around how we do that. And so I guess it would be my motion that we direct administration to add a fire chief to the organizational chart, and that we fund the position through collapsing the economic development budget and transferring the funds to the appropriate budget lines. And so that's my motion, which leaves us lots of room for further discussion.
I'd like to clarify that we have two different position titles written in the documentations. One calls it a fire services coordinator, and some call it chief. I think that is a very important thing to notice, so that our partnering communities and our collaborative work is understood that this is just simply another chief, not someone who has any authority over other fire departments.
Mr. Reid, members of council, that is a good clarification from Councillor McGee. This would be a fire chief for Kneehill County, would be working with and through the FMC, but the towns and villages have their own fire departments, and Kneehill County has no authority other than through the shared mutual aid agreements and the master fire agreement. We have no authority to tell a town or village how they manage their fire department. This is Kneehill County and Kneehill County alone. That is an error that we didn't catch when we created the RFD, the difference in the titles. It really doesn't matter what the title is, whether it's fire chief or fire services coordinator. But a good catch that was, we didn't notice that on the job profile as opposed to the RFD.
So are we wanting to amend that title then, Councillor McGee, to say fire services coordinator, or are you satisfied with the motion? I'm willing to make that voluntary amendment if you so wish.
I prefer fire chief.
Okay, we'll leave it as is then.
And Mr. Reid, members of council, we'll address the actual job profile and change that to match council's decision on the request for decision.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Just to add a comment, I think it's important to remember that the discussion we had around this position was the importance of understanding what it is that rural fire needs for Kneehill County. And we need a person with some expertise. We need a person with some understanding of what happens in a fire situation to be able to advise us. We need a person who has that knowledge to be able to talk to the other fire departments and to act as a liaison and provide us with information that we currently can't get. And I really see this as a very important thing for us as a council to do. So,
Thank you, Councillor King. I echo your sentiments. If there's no more questions, comments, we have a motion in front of us. I can read it. Councillor King moved to add fire chief to the organizational chart and fund the position through collapsing, oh boy, the economic development budget and transferring the funds to the appropriate budget line items. All those in favor? Any opposed? Mr. Hugo, you've got to vote one way or the other. In favor? Okay, motion has been carried. Thank you.
Thank you, council.
Next item on the agenda, new business 8.1 sponsorship request. Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Reed, members of council. We received just the other day after the package was a request from Canadian Badlands Tourism for a sponsorship for the Canadian Badlands Tourism Conference held in Medicine Hat on March 13th to the 15th. We have sponsored in the previous 2 years the conference, and this year Canadian Badlands Tourism is requesting a $1,500 sponsorship, which would also include written and digital recognition and participation in the sponsor's VIP reception prior to the gala. We are a major supporter of Canadian Badlands Tourism. The previous Reeve sat as both president, past president, vice president of Canadian Badlands, and this is it's a collaboration. When we speak of regional collaboration, this is a collaborative effort of over 60 municipalities in south and central Alberta, and it's quite important. In any rate, or in any event, you have the you don't have an RFD in front of you, but the request is for $1,500 for a sponsorship for to sponsor a session at the 2018 Canadian Badlands Tourism Development Conference.
What are council's wishes?
What is our requisition amount already to Canadian Badlands?
$2,500 annually.
As Mr. Hogan has stated, we have had quite an influence on Canadian Badlands, and with our purchase of Horseshoe Canyon, that kind of fits right in with what Canadian Badlands is trying to do as far as tourism and all sorts of different initiatives. I think there would be value in helping to sponsor their conference. It would put Kneehill County in a favorable limelight.
Have we in the past ever sponsored or contributed in any way to this conference?
Mr. Reed, members of council, yes, both in 2017 and in 2016.
And to a similar amount?
The amounts in In 2016, 500, in 2017, 750.
It's always hard to see the value that comes out of some of this stuff. Like early on out of Canadian Badlands, we saw the signs on our county underneath it and things like that. I think it's very valuable. It's a shame that Horseshoe Canyon is at the bottom end of our county. Wish it was in the middle. We would see a lot more value, I think, as a whole county. But I think tourism is where it is at. So I'm not sure exactly if it should be $1,500. It's worth a discussion.
Mr. Members of Council, some of the new councillors may not be aware, Badlands was quite involved in the early days of Horseshoe Canyon. When I say early days, when we were originally gifted the parking lot and stuff from the province, Badlands was a major funder to that program for Kneehill County. They helped arrange quite a bit of stuff actually through that. In the area, Badlands has attempted to work with the county. For example, one of the major successes Canadian Badlands has had in the region was the Stettler pheasant hunt that started 4 years ago. They attempted to bring that hunt to Kneehill County. It did not meet with the same level of popularity with the decision makers in Kneehill County, but they're quite active in the region and would probably be quite active as we try to do something with Horseshoe Canyon. I know that my conversations with them and with the board is they're waiting to find out what we're planning on doing with Horseshoe Canyon to find out what they can help with. And so it's kind of the chicken and the egg right now. Of course, Horseshoe Canyon being the probably one of the top 5 Badlands regions destinations. You know, Riding on Stone, Dinosaur Provincial Park, the Hoodoos, Horseshoe Canyon are probably, Horse Thief Canyon, those are probably the 4 or 5 big ones, and we own one of them. The other thing as well is we also sit right beside with the Horseshoe Canyon, the 2 quarter sections owned by the Nature Conservancy. So there's a 500-acre recreation area. It's not just Horseshoe Canyon, but it's actually the Nature Conservancy, 320 acres that's right beside us as well. So it's a large project that has lots of potential in the coming years.
Thanks for that information, Al. Someone is able to attend this conference from the county?
I move to donate $1,500 to the Canadian Badlands Tourism Development Conference, with the funds to come from transfer to individual organizations' account as named.
Thank you, Councillor McGee. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing as none, we have a motion on the table. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very much. We have no disposition of delegate business. We'll go on to 10.0, council and committee reports. Looks like we only have one, and that is Drumheller RCMP stats, along with an email. Are there any questions, comments? If not, we could have a motion.
Sorry, just a discussion. It would be nice if we could get these reports at the same meeting, and even if they were on the same page, just comparisons, since there are different divisions within the county, just to see where the crime rate is. Or what crime rate is within which areas. I know Drumheller is way east and Bicycle is the other way, but if there was some way of formatting that the one that's on the screen, we had it from here and from Bicycle or Three Hills on the same page, just to compare, just a thought.
Mr. Members of Council, getting them at the same time is a function of when the RCMP sends them to us. So this only came in a little bit ago, so we certainly can try. Maybe what we could do is when we get them is wait and put them on the same package. So one might be a couple of weeks late, so they come at the same time. But we're kind of at the mercy of the organization who provides them to us. So.
We also don't get bicycles or OLS detachments. We only receive the Three Hills and the Drumheller.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment. We've never seen anything from the Airdrie Bicycle Detachment. We also have 5 RCMP divisions within the county. Olds and Red Deer are also included, so I guess we can compare what we got.
Delburn would be interesting to get when it's half an hour from any detachment. It seems to be a hot spot.
For someone.
It is interesting information, and it was great for Gabe to come and speak to us, and so yeah, it is valuable just to see the different reports. I can make the motion that we move, the council receive the committee reports as presented.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. All those in favor? And that is carried. Councilor or council follow-up action list, 11.0. See, we have a couple items that haven't been completed yet, one of which I assume will be coming forward here in March. Is that correct? Any questions, comments?
I'll move the, as presented.
Okay, Councillor Kiever has moved council action items received for information. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is an in-camera session to do with an emergent legal and labor issues. Could someone move us into camera?
I so move.
Motion's been made to move into camera. Thank you, Councillor McGee. All those in favor? And that is carried and in camera.